Greetings all! Today, we are going to take a special look at the fighting type and analyze its attributes, the Pokemon assigned to the type, and how it functions from a combative standpoint. The fighting type may not be among the most common of types out there, but it is by far one of the most powerful and versatile of them all, and can more than make itself a threat to a wide variety of Pokemon when used correctly. The Pokemon assigned to the type might be seen as muscle brains to some and limited in their ability to think of anything other than fighting, but while this might be true to some extent, it belittles the work and training these Pokemon undertake to make themselves a threat in battle, for their might comes not just from raw power, but also careful technique and a mastery of the use of their body to deliver devastating strikes to opponents everywhere. It might not always be the best for handling special offenses in battle or delivering them much, but for physical beatdowns, there are few types that can stand next to the fighting type, and there are even fewer types that can outright nullify the incredible power that Pokemon of this type can often bring to bear, especially if they think that something like armor is going to be enough to protect them. The fighting type and the moves assigned to it might not seem that different in observation from those delivered by the normal type, and in many ways they are similar, with a focus primarily on physical strikes with only a few special attack variants existing. However, what separates the fighting type from the normal type is that, while the normal type has a hard time breaching armor of any sort, the fighting type and its associated attacks are specifically designed for the purpose of breaking through armor, rocky and metallic alike. This is possible because the technique involved in using a fighting type move involves the creation of a powerful impulse or a sudden change of momentum at the point of impact. While rocky and metallic armor are generally quite sturdy, they're also fairly inflexible compared to soft tissue, and even if they are tempered, a sudden impulse can cause armor of these types to suddenly flex in a way that causes internal shattering, damaging the armor and allowing much of the force to be spread in a small area compared to the wide area that the armor would normally diffuse a blow's energy over, in turn dealing severe damage to the possessor of said armor. This power makes the fighting type one of only two types that can penetrate and severely damage both rocky and metallic armor, the other being the ground type, and its effects can be transferred to damaging other Pokemon with similar body constructions. As a result of this, most of the attacks assigned to the fighting type are physical in nature and involve direct contact to deal damage, but it is noted that there is an exception in the form of aura energy. This energy acts as the life energy of all things, and while its properties are still mostly a mystery, some Pokemon can harness their internal aura to create energy projectiles out of the energy, such as with the Aura Sphere and Focus Blast attacks. These types of special attacks tend to be quite strong and have special secondary effects attached to them, making them dangerous weapons to have to face from both a raw damage perspective and a tactical one. Since armor-breaking power is a crucial component of the natural attributes of the fighting type, most of the Pokemon of the type tend to be those with an advanced and highly developed musculature to them, and as a result, a large portion of these Pokemon are mammalian in nature, many of them being almost human-like in their appearance and overall intelligence. Nonetheless, because of how relatively basic the fighting type's defining characteristic is, it is shared across many different parts of the kingdom of life, including oddities among amphibians, fungi, reptiles, crustaceans, dragons, and many more, even if they are not originally from this world. Though relatively disparate, they are still linked by their powerful attacks and can definitely make great use of armor-breaking strikes to deal devastating damage in battle, no matter what opponent might stand in their way. Outside of the fighting-type moves they specialize in, fighting-type Pokemon generally have a limited move pool to work with in terms of the moves they learn naturally, but they can often learn quite a large variety of moves via Move Tutor and TM if they somehow relate to their use of physical attacks to deal damage. Since the majority of the Pokemon that are assigned to the fighting type are physical combatants, this makes sense, and artificial assistance can prove to be incredibly beneficial in helping these creatures learn how to use moves that allow them to use their natural offensive power in new ways, opening up their move versatility and allowing for the forging of new battle strategies that help to put them a cut above the rest of their kind. However, they are still generally limited when it comes to learning new special attacks, as such power is relatively rare to observe among Pokemon assigned to this type. In terms of stat averages for the fighting type, the type shows strong performance in the areas that serve its constituent members the best, while being weak in the areas that are not necessarily of concern to it, a logical pathway that makes it one of the easier types for trainers to wrap their minds around. As far as their weaknesses go, the type has below average special attack and special defense stats, which makes sense as it is not designed to make use of special offenses, and in turn is rarely resistant to their effects. And its base defense stat is below average as well, though only by a small margin, showing that it at least has some physical resilience to it. On the other hand, its HP and speed stats are above average as a whole, the latter of which being the type's second highest stat, giving its constituent members a good amount of stamina to work with and the agility needed to deliver their attacks without hesitation. Moreover, its attack stat is far, far above average as a testimony to its incredible physical might. While this complete specialization in physical offense might limit their overall versatility to some degree, it shows that the Pokemon assigned to this type can easily prove to be an imposing physical force to contend with compared to other types, especially since the fighting type has the highest average base attack stat out of all known types. Currently, there are 57 recognized types of fighting type Pokemon, 22 of them being pure fighting types, and the remaining 35 of them being dual types. Additionally, 7 of the dual types are primary fighting types, while the other 28 are secondary fighting types. They are broken down into the following categories. Mammals. These creatures are unified as a whole because they are defined as mammals, and all share a basic anatomical form that defines what they are capable of doing with their fighting type powers. A very large portion of fighting type Pokemon fall under this category, and are further similar in that they tend to be pure fighting types more often than not, and represent the classic stereotype of the fighting type's attributes, namely relying on direct physical contact to attack, and focusing on close-quarter strikes over long-range combat. The only major exception to this can be found in Lucario, as their powers derive primarily from aura energy, and they are able to make great use of it in battle to not only detect their opponents and keep track of their movements even when they are not in view, but, more importantly, to attack and deal damage, in particular being masters of the Aura Sphere attack and being capable of creating the strongest version of the move out of any Pokemon. All of the Pokemon under this category as a whole, though, tend to dominantly learn fighting type moves for their main attacks, but can have some secondary moves under the belt and can be taught a decent variety of moves via move tutors and TMs, and thus have considerable versatility to them, even if their moderate movement speeds can leave them vulnerable to being outmaneuvered and beaten to the punch in a fight, so to speak. Amphibians. These creatures are distinguished from other fighting type Pokemon by their amphibious nature, and are generally among the odder fighting types, though this does not mean that they are incapable of putting up a good fight. Poliwraths do not have the ability to learn much in the way of fighting type attacks naturally, but their mastery of moves like Submission and Circle Throw nonetheless makes them a serious threat, and more than deserving of their fighting type assignment, even if it costs them a bit in terms of their usefulness as a water type. The members of the Croagunk family only naturally get access to the Revenge attack as part of their fighting type repertoire of moves, but they are still able to make great use of the move, and they still learn a diverse array of both physical and special attacks that can give them an offensive and tactical edge over other fighting types, especially with their poison type nature being their dominant offensive and anatomical attribute. Birds. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are birds, and since the flying type that many bird Pokemon are assigned to is generally effective at defeating fighting types, this is a bit of an odd combination, but it works out for those under this category. Combusken and Blaziken lost the ability to fly long ago, and have no need for it, as they can use powerful kicking attacks to deliver physical beatdowns on opponents in a heartbeat, even if their access to actual fighting type moves is a bit limited. Hawlucha, on the other hand, can still very much fly and specialize in using aerial maneuvers to deliver their fighting type attacks with extreme precision and agility, and they can often easily outmaneuver other Pokemon with their deceptive speed. This is only further highlighted by their powerful Flying Press attack, as it combines the raw attributes of both the flying and the fighting types into one move, and in turn can prove to be a devastating weapon if used on the right opponent. Reptiles. It is rare to see a natural penchant for using fighting type attacks in reptiles due to the limited ways in which they can often expend their energy, but Scraggy and Scrafty proudly stand out from the crowd with their array of specialized moves. Their unique mix of dark and fighting type attributes is observed in no other known Pokemon, and while their offensive stats might not be incredibly high, they can still make great use of moves like High Jump Kick to deal incredible damage to the opposition. It also helps that they are the only Fighting-type Pokemon that are completely immune to the effects of Psychic-type attacks, one of the Fighting-type's most prominent weaknesses, and can thus have a part to play on just about any Fighting-type specialist team. Insectoid. This special category is reserved for Heracross, as they are the only known insectoids that are proficient enough in using the Fighting-type attacks that they can readily be considered to be Fighting types in nature. While these insectoids don't get natural access to a lot of Fighting-type moves, the ones they can get tend to fit their combat style quite well, allowing them to break through the toughest of defenses with moves like Brick Break, Close Combat, and Reversal. Their incredible weakness to the Flying type can make them a bit tricky to handle in some cases, but they can still prove to be imposing beasts to have to face, especially with powerful attacks like Mega Horn to back up their offenses. Crustaceans. The members of the Crabrawler family are unique in that they have almost completely abandoned their water-type attributes, instead adapting to a life on land where they can more effectively make use of their impressive armor-breaking attacks and powers. Utilizing their imposing pinchers, these creatures can deliver devastating punching attacks that can crush weaker opponents, and the powerful Ice-type attributes that Crabrawler gain after evolving only serve to make them that much more of a threat. It might take unique circumstances to get them to that point, but these crabs can prove to be incredibly hardy monsters that can deliver monstrous close-quarter strikes more than capable of flattening anything that dares to underestimate them, and prove to be more than useful even outside of the watery habitats they once originated from. Fungus. This special category is reserved for Breloom, as it is the only Fighting-type Pokemon that is biologically a fungus, specifically a mushroom. These strange beasts might not be able to utilize their grass-type offenses as well as other Pokemon of that particular type, but their highly elastic arms can allow them to deal powerful punching attacks in close quarters, and the elastic nature of their limbs also grants them considerable reach across the battlefield that most opponents are unlikely to be prepared for initially. Their exceptional weakness to Flying-type attacks can leave them vulnerable in certain situations, but they are still deceptively powerful and definitely not worth underestimating, even if it seems like there is a fair distance between your Pokemon and their body. Dragons. Hakamo-o and Komo-o differ from other dragons in their ability to learn the Sky Uppercut and close combat attacks naturally, two moves that are almost never seen among dragon types in the wild, and which they can execute with enough power and ferocity that they more than qualify as true fighting types. In addition to this, these creatures are recognized for their incredible fighting spirits, and will never back down from a fight when they feel that justice must be served to those that have hurt those they care for, or have otherwise violated their code of ethics. They might be among the hardest of Fighting-type Pokemon to acquire, but these draconic monsters can still deliver flesh-ripping blows with the sharp scales that cover their bodies, and make effective use of their otherwise limited move versatility. Swords of Justice. These legendary beasts share no anatomical similarity with any of the previously mentioned categories, and are unique among fighting types for their stat arrangements and almost mystical power. Cobalion and Virizion are not particularly strong on offense, but their strong defenses allow them to weather the most vicious of blows, with Terrakion and Keldeo being more about offense and capable of making the most of their actual attacks. Aside from being linked together in lore, these creatures all learn a fairly similar set of moves and can make great use of them in battle, in particular the Sacred Sword attack, which is limited to them and a scant few other species, and the Secret Sword attack, which is completely unique to Keldeo and allows them to make the most of their abnormally high base special attack stat. Fairy-Morph. This special category is reserved for Meloetta when they are in their pirouette form. While Meloetta do not normally result to physical combat in battle, if they change to their pirouette form, they become incredibly nimble, and their physical offensive power increases dramatically, allowing them to make good use of the close combat attack they naturally gain access to. This particular form is usually only employed if these creatures feel that their special offenses are not having a desired effect, and is thus a move of desperation in most cases. Even so, it can definitely give them a physical edge in battle, and turn their otherwise lovely dancing into a terrifying destructive force in close quarters. Ultimate Clone. This special category is reserved for the artificial abomination that is Mega Mewtwo X. Mewtwo is one of only 2 species of Pokemon that have the ability to Mega Evolve into 2 different possible forms. And while its Y form might be the more natural of the two, its X form is a biological abomination that amplifies its muscle mass and physical strength so much that it effectively granted the same attributes as the fighting type. The fact that this unique mutation is only temporary is probably for the best, since the beast only knows one fighting type attack naturally and it isn't even a physical attack. But its physical offenses are nonetheless so heavily amplified in this state that almost no barrier is capable of standing in its way. It may definitely be the rarer of its 2 Mega Evolutions to see, but this form more than makes Mewtwo a physical juggernaut that very few Pokemon will ever stand a chance at defending themselves against. Herald of Ho-Oh. This special category is reserved for Marshadow, an entity of which very little is known aside from some of the basic powers and attributes of its type and some of the powers it possesses, all pieced together from centuries of accounts by researchers across the world. This spectral entity hides in the darkness and even the shadows of others so it can never be seen, as it is highly craven by nature and prefers to observe others rather than directly interact with them. It specializes in copying the movements of other life forms and mimicking them in order to improve its own fighting style, eventually surpassing those that it mimics. In terms of its purpose, it is believed that this creature acts as a herald for the legendary Pokemon Ho-Oh, and a guardian of the rainbow wings it provides to trainers that it likes and wishes to battle with someday. Though the small creature is easily corrupted by evil, it is not inherently violent, and only does what it does to help keep Ho-Oh safe, making it the legendary bird's only true guardian and an entity that will act in accordance to protect its master, even if that means attacking and killing those that show themselves to have evil intentions in their hearts. Ultra Beasts. This special category is reserved for Buzzwole and Fairy-Morph, 2 of the extra universal entities known as the Ultra Beasts. While their physical forms may differ greatly, both of these creatures are gifted combatants that can make use of powerful fighting type attacks to deliver catastrophic damage to anything that gets in their way in their own specialized manner. Buzzwole are all about brute strength, and are like boxers in that they specialize in punching attacks primarily, which works well for them as they have the strength needed to destroy machines that weigh 500 tons on average with a single mighty punch. Fairy-Morph, on the other hand, are more akin to kickboxers, accelerating their otherwise lithe frames to deliver powerful kicking attacks at 120 miles per hour, dealing incredible damage in the process while still being able to deliver special attacks with their form just as impressively. In looking at the fighting type's advantages and disadvantages in battle, in terms of offense, the fighting type has 5 advantages, 5 disadvantages, and 1 negative immunity. The type is at an advantage against the rock type because of the primary nature of the fighting type, namely its capacity to break through armor by imparting enough of an impulse to cause the armor to buckle and shatter internally. This applies especially in the case of rocky armor, whose inflexible nature makes it susceptible to damage from these kinds of strikes, in turn allowing fighting type attacks to penetrate and bust through armor of this type. The type is at an advantage against the steel type for the same reasons as the rock type. The generally inflexible nature of metallic armor makes it susceptible to breaking and shattering from the deliverance of strikes that impart too much of an impulse for the armor to withstand the blow. The type is at an advantage against the ice type because, while it may have properties that differ significantly from rocky and metallic armor, the icy nature of many Pokemon assigned to this type renders them vulnerable to the same type of shattering strikes, with ice of any type in particular being readily shattered with enough of an impulse from a blow designed to break through armor of any type. The type is at an advantage against the dark type for reasons that are still uncertain completely, but it is strongly believed that the same impulse imparting power that fighting type moves have against armor has a similar effect against Pokemon that naturally harness anti-positive energy, disrupting the flow of this energy through their body and in turn damaging their internal systems severely. From an ideological perspective, this could also be seen as the might of fighting heroes vanquishing the forces of darkness or something of that nature, but the true nature of this odd relationship is still uncertain. The type is at an advantage against the normal type because normal type Pokemon do not possess any sort of physical or elemental association that can help to buffer against the armor breaking capabilities of the fighting type, resulting in these types of attacks dealing severe damage to Pokemon of the normal type and leaving them far worse for the wear compared to other types of Pokemon. The type is at a disadvantage against the bug type because, while they might not be terrific defenses against basic attacks or piercing strikes from creatures with flying type powers, the exoskeletons of many bug type Pokemon work as excellent shock absorbers against the impulse-directed assaults of fire type Pokemon. So when a move of this type actually strikes a bug type, the exoskeleton absorbs and distributes the energy imparted over a wider area, in turn lessening its overall impact on any one part of them and decreasing the damage dealt by it. The type is at a disadvantage against the flying type for both psychological and physical reasons. On the one hand, flying type Pokemon and their associated attacks tend to be best utilized against creatures that are on the ground firmly. Many flying type Pokemon are afraid of flying types because they are not used to having something in the air where they do not have a familiar foothold, and thus tend to hold back for fear of retaliation. On the other hand, there is a physical attribute to this as well, as flying types can often whip up small gusts of wind and even barriers of wind as a buffer against attacks of this type, letting the air absorb and disperse the energy coming towards them to soften the final overall impact. The type is at a disadvantage against the poison type because of the physical characteristics of many poison types and the fear associated with them. A lot of poison types possess abnormal body forms that are more resilient and capable of absorbing the energy of fire type blows, so the impact of those attacks is softened in that regard. Furthermore, as with the flying type, there is a level of associated fear involved in using these types of attacks, as even the strongest of fighters can be weakened and downed with simple poison, making it less likely that Pokemon using these moves will deliver them with the same force if they are afraid that contact will result in them being weakened in a way beyond their biological control. The type is at a disadvantage against the psychic type because most psychic type Pokemon naturally exude an aura around them that either helps to directly buffer against the impact of and energy used in fire type attacks, or have the effect of subtly scrambling the minds of any user of a fire type move as they get close to the target, confusing them temporarily and disrupting their muscle systems so the attack does not land with the same power it normally would, and thus keeps the sometimes frail bodies of psychic types partially safe from severe damage. The type is at a disadvantage against the fairy type because the effects of fairy force energy on the users of fighting type moves is very similar to that of psychic energy, and thus serves to disperse the energy used in these strikes and keep those Pokemon afraid to use their full power on fairy types for fear of the damage that fairy force energy can inflict on their bodies in high concentrations. Lastly, the type has no effect against ghost type Pokemon under normal circumstances, as attacks of this type are unable to readily target the oftentimes non-corporeal forms of ghost types, leaving them to simply pass right through the target as if they were not there, and in turn nullifying any and all damage they might otherwise be capable of dealing. Defensively speaking, the fighting type has 3 resistances, 3 weaknesses, and no immunities. The type is resistant against the rock type because, in addition to being designed primarily for the purpose of breaking through things like rocky armor, the bodies of fighting types are built to be tough and resistant against severe blunt force trauma, and can resist the effects of certain types of energy-based attacks associated with the rock type, granting them a noticeable resistance against damage from them. The type is resistant against the dark type because, since the effects of anti-positive energy are designed to impact the mind more so than they are the actual body of an opponent, the basic brain structures of many fighting types are biologically designed in such a way as to be naturally resistant against the effects of these types of attacks, since there is generally little there to corrupt or shut off in terms of having an internal energy source powering their bodies, as is the case with the psychic types that are vulnerable to the dark type. The type is resistant against the bug type not only because the tough, rugged bodies of fighting types are capable of resisting the fierce attacks of bug types much as they do the rock type, but also more so because they have no fear of bug types or any type of insectoid-like creature, and thus are mentally resilient against their assaults, powering through them and shrugging them off as if they were nothing in some cases. The type is weak against the flying type because the psychologically grounded nature of many fighting types means that they have a hard time dealing with attacks that come from or involve the air, as it leaves them with little ability to hit their otherwise nimble targets or anything to counterattack aside from air, as well as feeling helpless against the aerial assaults of flying type Pokemon. The type is weak against the psychic type for the sheer psychological struggle that it induces in the fighting type Pokemon that are exposed to this power. While the brain structures of many fighting types are generally quite basic, they are also very similar to that of humans, and are thus able to display a number of emotional states and thought patterns that go beyond what normal Pokemon are truly capable of thinking. This sadly means, though, that they are highly susceptible to the effects of mind games and hypnosis, among other things, thus allowing psychic types to take advantage of this with telepathy, to weaken the minds of their opposition, even going so far as to lock their minds into a state of psychological panic that weakens their entire bodies and renders them little more than puppets to the whims of their predators. The type is lastly weak to the Fairy type for reasons that are still technically unclear, but it seems that Fairy Force energy has a similar effect on the minds of fighting types as psychic energy does, scrambling their minds and weakening their entire forms, with fighting types having no special elemental powers that can act as a barrier against the damaging power of Fairy Force energy. As far as using the fighting type in battle goes, it can be both difficult and rewarding to use depending upon the experience level of a trainer. On the one hand, fighting type Pokemon tend to have more offensive power to them than other types of Pokemon even at a young age, and are often intelligent enough that it is possible to develop complex battle strategies with them and adapt their moves fairly readily, allowing them to expand their move pool quickly and build a solid foundation as a trained partner. Moreover, their natural armor-breaking skills can make them invaluable for dealing with armored opponents and taking down common normal-type Pokemon with relative ease. However, in saying that, it can be a bit difficult for novice trainers to get a hold of them, as they tend to be rather uncommon to come across compared to other types, especially since a lot of fighting-type Pokemon are usually bred in captivity, where they are used for professional fighting tournaments. In addition, because they are weak to the flying type in most cases, these creatures can have a hard time dealing with the young bird Pokemon that adorn the teams of many novice trainers, and can be hit just as hard later on in time when confronting specialists of more advanced types like the Psychic and Fairy types. Their lack of access to useful special moves further puts them at a disadvantage, as it limits the usefulness of their overall move pool in a combative setting. Nonetheless, most fighting types have more than enough physical strength behind them to make themselves a force to be reckoned with, and with a bit of help from TMs and move tutors, they can put that strength to good use in a number of ways. It might have some glaring issues that can be targeted and taken advantage of, but when it comes to doing what Pokemon of this type do best, namely beating their opposition into the ground with both technique and sheer brutality, the fighting type is one to respect and definitely not one that should ever be underestimated in battle. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
No.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.